Imagine you own 1,000 acres of rolling wheat country. The land is paid for, the soil is deep, and the sun is climbing over a horizon that belongs to you. You walk the fence line, and you feel the weight of something permanent. This is not a quarterly earnings report. This is ground truth. This is how wealth is supposed to last. You own the earth, and the earth produces. You supply the world with the most basic human need, and the world pays you for it. That is the fantasy. That is what people see when they look at a farm from the window of a car. The problem is that the fantasy stops the moment you have to buy the tractor. But here is the first thing the serious owner discovers. The fantasy is that you are the farmer. The reality is that the person driving the combine and the person holding the deed are often two entirely different people. Consider the largest private farmland owner in the United States, a man named Bill Gates. He does not wake up before dawn to fix a broken irrigation pivot. He owns the claim on the soil, the water rights beneath it, and the long-term cash flow that the soil can generate. Gates matters not because he is personally farming, but because he shows what farmland becomes at the top of the capital stack: a quiet, diversified claim on food, water, rent, and time. The operating farmer is his counterparty, his tenant, or his contractor. The economics of owning farmland are not the economics of farming. They are the economics of controlling the asset that farming depends on. To understand what it really means to own this asset, you have to stop looking at the crop. The crop is not the asset. The land is the asset. The crop is only the temporary expression of what that land, water, climate, debt, and labor can produce in a single season. The operating farmer may sell wheat. The farmland owner is after something deeper: the difference between what each acre can earn and what each acre costs to control. The price of wheat is set in Chicago, but it is determined by the harvest in Russia, the monsoon in India, the drought in Australia, and the strength of the United States dollar. The owner does not set the price. The owner takes the price that the world gives them at the moment the crop comes out of the ground. This is the first lesson of the economics of farmland. The owner is not a price maker. The owner is a price taker who is also a cost manager. And the costs are relentless. The soil requires nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. The seed must be bought from a multinational corporation that holds the patents to the genetics. The equipment must be replaced or repaired, and a single combine can cost more than a luxury house. The fuel for that combine is tied to crude oil, which is tied to geopolitical events that the farmer cannot influence. But the real cost, the one that destroys more farms than bad weather, is the debt service. Farmland is expensive. It trades at a multiple of its annual cash rent or its productive capacity, and that multiple is heavily influenced by interest rates. When rates are low, capital flows into land as an inflation hedge, driving prices up. When rates rise, the cost of carrying that debt eats the margin alive. The owner is often highly leveraged. They borrow against the future value of the harvest to pay for the present cost of planting. If the harvest fails or prices crash, the bank does not care about the weather. The bank cares about the payment. This is where the ownership fantasy becomes a trap. The owner can own the land on paper, but the bank owns the claim on its cash flow. To really understand this, you have to look at the structure beneath the topsoil. The land itself is a real asset, but it is illiquid. It cannot be sold quickly without a loss. It is also an asset that demands constant stewardship. However, its primary economic power is not the crop. It is scarcity. There is only so much prime acreage with the right combination of water, sunlight, and temperature. That scarcity is protected by law, by zoning, and by the sheer difficulty of converting raw land into productive soil. This creates a foundational economic truth. Farmland is a fixed asset in a world of growing demand. The population grows, and the amount of arable land does not. That tension is what makes the asset attractive to institutional capital. The serious capital moving into farmland today is no longer only the family farmer. It is the pension fund, the sovereign wealth fund, and the university endowment. These buyers do not care about the romance of the harvest. They care about the internal rate of return. They look at farmland as a long-duration asset that provides a hedge against inflation and a low correlation to public stock markets. They buy hundreds of thousands of acres at a time, negotiate better prices on inputs, and employ agronomists to maximize yield per square foot. They spread the fixed cost of management over a vast geography, which insulates them from a localized drought or pest infestation. For them, farmland is not a job, it is a portfolio allocation. And this is the divide that defines the economics of ownership. At the small end, the owner is buying a job. They are working the land, managing the bank, and betting their family's future on the weather and the commodity price. Their margin is thin, their risk is concentrated, and their exit is difficult. At the large end, the owner is buying a system. They are buying soil and water rights and climate history. They are buying a relationship with the federal crop insurance program, which can protect part of the revenue when weather, yield, or prices move against the operator. They are buying a hedge against the collapse of other asset classes. They are buying a legal structure that allows them to pass the asset to heirs without triggering a devastating estate tax. The difference between the two owners is not just scale. It is access to capital, access to cheap debt, and access to the legal and political environment that makes the asset valuable. The legal environment is the wall around the cash flow. The farm owner is not as free as the romance suggests. What they plant, how they irrigate, what chemicals they use, and how they manage runoff can all be shaped by law, contracts, subsidies, and local water rules. In many states, groundwater rights are a separate legal property that must be defended in court. The owner must comply with labor laws, safety standards, and transportation rules for moving grain to market. They must navigate the complex architecture of the Farm Bill. This is not a free market. This is a market heavily managed by the state. The subsidies are a stabilization mechanism designed to prevent the collapse of the rural economy, but they also change the economics. The law does not merely regulate the farm. It shapes the economics of who can farm, how they farm, and what the land can become when the owner wants to sell. Then there is the splintered nature of ownership. One person farms the land, another person owns the land. A bank holds the mortgage, a government agency shapes the insurance. A water district controls access to the irrigation. A seed company controls the genetics of the crop. A grain elevator controls the local market access. A family trust controls who can ultimately sell the asset. The owner is standing at the center of a web of counterparties, each holding a piece of the permission structure. The owner's job is to manage those relationships as much as the soil. The tax structure adds another layer. The owner may benefit from capital gains treatment, estate planning, and conservation easements. They can depreciate the equipment and the drainage systems. But the soil itself is not depreciated like a machine. It is permanent. That permanence is both the attraction and the burden. The risk that can destroy farmland value is not just a drought. A drought can be insured. The risk is a long-term change in the climate pattern that makes the land unsuitable for the crop it was designed for. That is a permanent loss of value. The risk is a change in government policy that removes the subsidy or restricts access to water. The risk is a collapse in global trade that makes the crop uncompetitive. The risk is a change in food technology or animal protein demand that reduces the need for feed grains. The owner is selling a product that can be substituted, disrupted, and regulated out of existence. The only thing that protects the owner is the sheer cost of replacing the asset. You cannot replicate 1,000 acres of Iowa topsoil in a laboratory. That replacement cost is the floor on the asset value. This is why serious capital wants to own farmland. It is not because the returns are spectacular. Over long periods, farmland has often offered equity-like returns with less visible volatility. The attraction is the inflation hedge. When the central bank prints money, the nominal price of hard assets rises. Farmland is the hardest of hard assets. It is also a store of wealth that has a positive carry. The owner can hold the land and collect rent or grow a crop, earning a yield while they wait for the asset to appreciate. This is the deep structure of the ownership. The owner is buying a financial instrument that pays a dividend, grows in value over time, and is structured to benefit from favorable tax treatment on the eventual sale. The land is a hedge. It is a legacy. It is not a crop. The real business of farmland ownership is capital allocation. The owner must decide how much debt to take on, how much to invest in technology, and how to structure the entity to protect the asset from lawsuits, taxes, and heirs. The owner is not a farmer. They are a treasury function managing a giant, slow-moving balance sheet. The most successful owners are the ones who understand that they are not in the wheat business. They are in the real estate business, the commodity business, the political business, and the capital markets business. They watch the yield curve as closely as they watch the weather forecast. And then there is the final lesson. The owner of farmland is always renting the asset from the future. If they deplete the soil, the future yields suffer. If they take on too much debt, the future cash flow goes to the bank. If they sell the land to pay a tax bill, the future owner gets the upside. The economics of farmland are a slow-motion negotiation between the present owner and the generations that will follow. The land endures, the owner does not. The business, in the end, is a stewardship. It is a contract with a piece of geography that can give you everything if you treat it right, and can take everything away if you treat it like a balance sheet entry. The men and women who own it are not just buying soil, they are buying time. They are betting that the world will need what the land produces, and that the world will pay enough to cover the ever-rising cost of pulling it out of the ground. It is a beautiful business, but it is a brutal business. The owner wakes up every morning with a prayer for rain and a spreadsheet for the bank, and they know that the land does not care about either. It just sits there, waiting, demanding its share.